Hello everyone, this video is in our Great Endgames series and it features a game between Stockfish and Leela Zero from the recent Fisher Random final, super final from the TCEC season 21. In this game, Stockfish demonstrates maybe the most astonishing level of technique that I've ever seen. I would never expect a 3650 level engine like Leela to be ground down like this from a position like this, and I certainly wouldn't expect to be watching it live and actually not have a clue really what Leela had done wrong. What you also see is that in all the engine matches that I ran from all sorts of different positions, Stockfish is winning virtually all of them, but no other engine is. So this is really a Stockfish special, and it's really, I think by studying this game you can learn a huge amount about endgame technique and also understand, I think, just how amazing and complicated and interesting endgames can be. So watching the game live, I mean, I was asked in the TCEC chat what I thought of this position, and you know, white's a pawn up, but material is greatly reduced. White can create a passed pawn on the queen side, but he's quite away from doing that, you know. And of course, there's also the opposite coloured bishops, which you know, really add drawing tendencies. In principle, white's okay for asymmetric exchanges, bishop for knight. But if the knights get swapped off, then well, something pretty amazing would have to be in the position, like for example the white king being on b6, activated really far, for that to be any sort of win for white. So I said dead draw, and that didn't look like a very good answer, you know, sort of 30 moves later when Stockfish's evaluation was going through the roof. But in actual fact, I mean, this position is a draw, and maybe not even such a hugely difficult one. But I think that the key point is that the margins of error are much smaller than you'd ever imagine. Certainly much more than I ever dreamt, because from move 39 onwards, and we're on move 33 at the moment, Stockfish won all of the games, the 25-minute games that I ran against Komodo 2.6, so most recent version, on my 14-thread machine, and only Stockfish was capable of holding some draws as black. And then after move 50, even Stockfish was losing all of its black games. So quite amazing, but yeah, I mean, the danger in this position is way, way higher than you'd ever imagine from the rather modest material on the board. So how should we assess this position? I mean, where could things go wrong then for black? Well, I think what you've got to look at in the position, there are three main fields of action. First of all, there's the queenside pawn structure. And, you know, white's extra pawn is on the queen side, so that's where it's going to create a passed pawn. And, you know, ideally, what sort of passed pawn would white want to create? Either a passed A pawn or a passed B pawn. A passed C pawn would probably not stretch black enough. And what do I mean by that? I mean that, you know, you can create a passed pawn, of course, but you don't have the firepower to just push it through regardless of what black does. So, I mean, really, this passed pawn is going to have to distract black on the queen side, tie him down, and then you'll sort of, you know, come in with your king maybe and win the G pawn. I mean, that's the basic scenario that makes sense from this position. So, you know, if you're looking at the type of advantage you'd like to make, if you're not that keen on a passed C pawn, then playing A4, B4, B5, and then C5 afterwards, that's not a great way to do it. Much more challenging to play the pawn to A5 and then to play B4 and C4 and B5, because in that case, if black plays A takes B5, C takes B5, then we can create a passed A pawn. And if you just leave the pawns as they are, well, we've always got chances of playing C4 to C5 to C6, those sort of typical breaks, you know, to somehow create a passed A pawn or B pawn. So yeah, I mean, from that point of view, you know, we're going to be trying to push our pawn to A5 and trying to push the pawns B4, C4, and B5. We'll see that in the game. And then, one of black's big decisions is, should black wait and let white do that and just hold the resulting position, which is a pretty, sensible and normal endgame thing to do, or should you try and meet white head on and adjust the position of your queenside pawns? That's a very key decision there. Now, the second battlefield really is the activity of both kings. What you'll see in the next moves, very, very interesting, is that both sides, with their minor pieces, are doing their utmost to prevent the opponent's king from getting active. And certainly, from the white point of view, if white gets the king up to somewhere like b6, black's going to be in a whole lot of trouble. So black really wants to prevent that, and the simplest way to prevent that is by getting its own king active, somewhere in the centre, somewhere here, for example, or here d4, just to prevent, sort of shoulder away the white king and prevent it from getting active. So there's going to be a big battlefield around that as well. And then the final thing is the position of the kingside pawn structure, and in particular the g pawn. And the g pawn is a funny little thing, really. It's I think if the pawn was on h7, I think white's winning chances would be much less. But this pawn can be a target. It can be forced to move forwards. And the further forwards you force it to move, the easier it is to attack, and the harder it is for black to defend. And what we're going to see in the game is the pawn being nudged forward to g4, and then suddenly black is ending up having lots of problems because actually black's got two bits of its position to defend that are on opposite sides of the board, the g4 pawn and the b7 pawn. It's all very far away at the moment, but you'll see what Stockfish does. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to go through the game as it was played, Stockfish against Leela, and you're going to see this fantastic endgame technique of Stockfish's, and then afterwards we're going to go through a few of the critical moments and try and understand what Leela could have done better. So let's start off. So knight e2 was Stockfish's move, and funnily enough, my hardware doesn't Stockfish doesn't actually play this move on my hardware. So maybe it's something you only find on 104 threads. It's a wonderful idea, actually. The idea you're going to see is as follows: knight e4, knight d4, bishop h3, bishop e5. Now, obviously, we're attacking the g-pawn. Wow. But it's much more than that. I mean, first of all, obviously, forcing the g-pawn to advance brings it closer to you. But if you have a look now, where can the black king invade in the centre? The black king can't invade anywhere. The knight and the bishop are doing an incredible job of keeping back the black king. We're covering c7, d6, g7, f6. The knight's covering c6, d7, e6, f5. There's no way that the black king can get active like this. So that's white's first point, trying for that battlefield, trying to stop the black king from getting active. And at the same time, combining it, forcing the g-pawn to move forwards. So Leela played very sensibly there, g6. No need to move the g-pawn any further than necessary. If you get forced to move g5 later, maybe you will, but for the moment, g6 is fair enough. And now a4 from Stockfish, kicking off a queenside play with the rook's pawn. Got traditional nowadays, and Leela just has to decide here: am I going to wait, or am I going to block this pawn? And Leela just decides to wait here. So king d8, a5, king e7. Pretty sensible, just centralising the king. If ever this knight moves away, then the king can get active. c4 from white, getting the pawns rolling. Bishop f1, b3, if you have a look at the position of Leela's minor pieces, I think this was really what kind of Leela's plan, really. I mean, the knight and the bishop are kind of doing what the knight and the bishop, Stockfish's knight and bishop are doing to the black king. Leela's knight and bishop are doing it to the white king, because we're covering all sorts of squares here. c3, d3. Very, very hard for the white king to actually get active. And even if it gets to b4, the knight on e4 is covering c5, so the king can't get in. So, Leela's plan here has simply been to, okay, we leave the queen side as it is, and we'll just use our minor pieces here to completely hold white back. So, b3 to protect the pawn. Yeah, g5 from Leela here. I don't know, really. I mean, I would have waited with this one. It's not necessary, I don't think. I don't see any reason why you need to do that. So, yeah, it just seems a little bit odd, but it doesn't seem to ruin anything yet. King d1, king d7, king e1, bishop d3. Still the white king completely trapped here. It really does look, like, well, there's not much that you can do, is there? But okay, Stockfish sort of understands that its king needs to be active in order to achieve anything. So now it's going to try and do that, and the only way to break up this structure of minor pieces is to use the knight. And I mean, in the next few moves, you really see. I mean, I think you can say, Stockfish abandoning any thought really of advancing on the queen side. Any of those grand plans, they're put to one side. It's purely a local battle. How do I break up the structure of minor pieces in order to get my king active? So a number of ideas possible. Stockfish starts with knight e2. Now, I mean, I think if I was playing as white, I'd be sort of a little bit in a sort of a slightly resigned state, because I mean, how can you win if you're retreating like this? But endings are very funny, and as long as you're not retreating a piece to a permanently passive position, that the knight is going to have to stay on the back rank to cover some pawns, and it'll never be able to move. If you've got some thought of, well, later the piece will be able to return, then you're still alive. Your winning chances are still alive. But that's quite different to middle games somehow. And it's one of the things that makes end games difficult. Both to play well, but also to defend. So bishop c2 played, knight c1. King e6, bishop b8, and you'll notice along the way that there are quite a few tactics. So, for example, knight c5 hitting b3 looks good, but king d2 works great for white, because bishop b3, bishop a7 wins a piece, because the knight on c5 can no longer defend the bishop on b3. And that's what, I mean, these sort of short-range tactics, that's part of real part of endgame technique. You often don't need to see long tactics, but you need to be really alert to small little things like that just, make the difference between being able to play a plan and not. But, after king f5, Stockfish could have looked to play king e2 to e3, but it decided that it didn't like having its knight on c1 under these circumstances. And indeed, how are you going to get rid of this bishop on c2? Not so easy, maybe. So it went for a rather different plan. It played knight e2. And, what is white aiming for? Well, you can certainly see one plan is that here in the game black played king f6, and Leela went for a slightly different way of defending all of a sudden. But if black had just sort of played something similar, then I think that Stockfish would have played this line, which is knight c2, knight d6, king e1, bishop d3, and knight b4. And this is a very nice way for white of shielding the pawn on c4 and the pawn on b3 from attack by the bishop, because we're covering c2, gets the bishop out of the way, and then the king can just come forwards. And then, the next phase comes along, but I think, that would have been moving the knight to b4. That was probably going to be Stockfish's plan if Leela had just sort of stayed still. In actual fact, Leela played king f6, knight d4, bishop d3. We got a little bit of shuffling here, as you often get. And bishop f1 was played by Leela. So yeah, I mean, as I said, I think if king g6, then we would have got this move knight c2 to b4, and we would have transposed more or less into what we've just seen. But Leela played bishop f1, and now bishop a7 played, stopping knight c5, king e5, and knight e2. So knight e2 played. We're stopping the bishop from coming back to d3, Leela waited with king f6, knight to c1, stopping the bishop coming to d3. Next step is king e1, chase away the bishop on f1, and then we can come out with a king. So basically, Stockfish has broken that. It looked like an unbreakable to me, looked like an unbreakable barrier of the minor pieces, and its king is active. It's got its king active, and then the next phase of the plan will come in, and that'll be activating the queenside pawns. So knight d6 played, bishop g2, king f2, bishop g2, and then knight f5 check. And now an interesting moment, actually, because you sort of really think, king c5, that was the move that you'd really want to play. But here you sort of run up against black's active king. And actually, after king c5, you're slightly clumsily placed. King e5, king b6, king d4, and the king's getting active. Actually, what Stockfish understands is that getting the king active, even more active rather, is not the main goal right now, because all of its pieces have to be playing, and the first goal should be to activate this knight on c1. So that's why Stockfish just plays king c3, nice and calm, king e7, and then knight d3. And this knight is getting active now, and well, in the next few moves we see Stockfish getting its pieces, its minor pieces, again optimally placed. And I mean, think back to the start where Stockfish played this great maneuver. All the way back. We're going all the way back with knight e2 to d4, and then bishop e5, putting the pieces in the center like this, covering the black king. Well, Stockfish is going back to this idea, and again setting up the minor pieces in that way, only of course with an active king to boot, and also a much improved queenside structure. So king e7, knight d3, king e6, bishop c5, bishop d4. No fear at all, of course, of these asymmetric exchanges. The knight versus bishop ending will be completely winning for white. King e7, knight c5, king f7, and bishop e5. And you can compare it. We had bishop on e5, knight d4 before. We've got bishop e5, knight c5 now. We've got the same idea, really, of covering all these queenside and central squares. So, keeping the black king rather passive. In actual fact, I mean, what we've done, we've sort of upgraded this minor piece configuration, because we've got the knight on c5. And this actually makes a big difference. I mean, the knight is attacking the pawn on b7. And when we play this move b4 to b5, we're putting real pressure on the queen side, because the a6 pawn is attacked. So, I mean, it's not a question of white plays b4 to b5, black can wait. No, black's really got to react. So, actually quite critical. And somehow Leela's been, has just been outmaneuvered in actual fact. And white's managed to get its minor pieces absolutely optimal. So, black played bishop f3, b4, bishop c6. This is the next line of defense for black, just holding back b5. And, white could just try and play b5 and trade off the b pawns, get the b pawn, but I mean, the a pawn's on a5. The black king could then get active. That's maybe not the optimal way of doing things. So Stockfish wants much more. So you're going to see what Stockfish does. It's quite incredible now, because the strategy that comes out is amazing. King c2, knight e3, knight e4, and what is white's idea here? Well, actually, Stockfish understands simply that it needs an extra pressure point on black's position. It's got all this queenside advantage. It's got beautifully placed pieces. It's keeping the black king under wraps. But, there is that thing of the principle of two weaknesses, that you always need two weaknesses in an opponent's position in order to stretch the opponent's resources and create entry points. And, well, this is just what Stockfish does. But can you see which weakness Stockfish is going to create? I hadn't really seen it coming, I have to say. A little bit of shuffling. bishop g3, and then bishop e1. And Stockfish is coming around with bishop d2 to attack the pawn on g4 and force it to move forwards. Once the pawn on g4 moves forwards, Stockfish is going to bring out the Zugzwang instruments of torture and start pressing again. Now, I mean, what I'd vaguely thought was, maybe couldn't I just play knight g7 and then just go to e6 and protect the pawn on g5? But then you see why it was so important for white to activate the king. If it was on d1, none of this would work. On d4, now we're aiming to invade, and then we'll bring the knight into d6 or into c5, and b7 is going to be weak. So king f5, knight d6, king e6, king c5. And it's quite striking in actual fact here that, I'm just threatening bishop g3 and king b6. That's the idea, and b7 will fall. And if you go knight f5, I go b5, bishop f3, and then I just take off and go king d6, and the c-pawn runs. So already, we're getting to the point where white's king is so active that a number of these opposite-coloured bishop endings are proving to be wins for white. So g4 was played by Leela, and now bishop g3, king f7, and now this lovely move knight f2. So we're hitting the pawn on g4, and the big problem basically is that the only good piece that black's got, the only one that's vaguely, flexible, is the bishop on f3. But now that you've played bishop f3, we play b5. And, well, that's the step forwards. It still doesn't seem that crucial. Because, the black, again, Leela's placed its minor pieces in such a way that it's covering an awful lot of entry squares here, So not easy for the white king to get past, but, there is the possibility, of course, of coming around here. So that is definitely something a little bit worrying there, which is why then black is going to keep the king in the area of the queen side just to be able to deal with that. So bishop f4, a little bit of shuffling there, and now knight e4. And this is really starting to get quite crucial for black here. So the nice thing about playing knight f2 and then knight e4 is that the bishop's sort of shielded from this pawn here. So if you go a takes b5, c takes b5, the bishop's not covering a8 because the knight on e4 is blocking the diagonal. So that makes pushing the pawn much more dangerous. And of course white's threatening knight c5, attacking this pawn on a6. So black played king c8 just to be ready for any advance of the pawn. Knight c5, threatening the pawn on a6, ab, cb rather. And I think there's two things, that have happened here. First of all, amazingly, white is going to be able to create its passed a pawn. So really, make sure that the black pieces are tied down as far away as possible from the king side, which will, give white plenty of time to maybe move its king over to here, attack the pawn. And of course, the pawn's nice and close to the white position, so you don't have to travel that far. But there's another very important part to this, that when after A, B, C, B, what's actually happened is that you've actually increased the paths that the white king has into your position. With the pawn on c4 before, the king was blocked by knight on f5, bishop on f3. Now the king can come into c4, and from then on, c5, b6, for example. And, it's too much space. The black minor pieces can't cover that entry point. So, this whole plan as well has increased the mobility of white's king. I'm in tears virtually as I'm seeing this. It's just everything is so beautiful, so wonderfully worked out. It's just incredible. Really just amazing technique. And this is being done to Leela, after all. Fantastic positional ending, brilliant endgame player, and yet it's just getting outplayed like anything. Really amazing play from Stockfish. So. It used to be the days that you'd say, got to get the engines in endings, they can't play them. But just the endgame skill that they demonstrate is just beyond anything really. So king d8, bishop e5, bishop g2, king c3, bishop h1, and now a really wonderful maneuver again, knight a4. I hadn't seen that one coming at all. So this knight is coming into b6, which is lovely, supporting the advance of the pawn, but it's also stepping back and freeing the king now so that the king can come into b4, c5. I mean, the pieces are just optimal and being optimized all the time, really beautiful endgame play. So bishop f3, knight b6, bishop e2, king b4, king e7, king c5, king e6, bishop g3. Fantastic anchor point for the bishop. It protects the pawn on h2. The h2 pawn protects the bishop on g3, and the bishop just cuts across the black position, taking away so many active squares from the black king. I mean, it's very similar to all this stuff that's happening here. It's very similar to the techniques you see in knight and bishop versus king. All these maneuvers you have just to restrict the black king, and you're seeing them again and again here. So knight e3, bishop f4, knight f5, a little bit of shuffling from Stockfish just because it can. Knight c4, knight e5 check, bishop f4, knight f5, knight c4. But this knight again is doing this job of shielding the a6 square. So after king d7, now we can go a6, and now it's all too late. You can't stop the pawn from queening. a8 queen. And this was trivial, and the technique's so good that the white king hasn't even had to go to a7 to support the pawn. Stockfish has done it all with the pieces, so it just means that the king's nice and close here and can just shoulder away the black king. So, Stockfish won a few moves later, but, this was quite really astonishing technique. I think the best I've ever seen. So, how could Leela have done better? Well, all very interesting points in actual fact. I think, with the benefit of hindsight, it's pretty clear that that Leela really needed to do something about the queenside pawn structure. I mean, it's always the question with these things, do you let the opponent do all of the work in order to create a passed pawn, or do you take action on the queen side early and in a way force the decision a lot earlier? And that's a very difficult decision, but I think if with the benefit of hindsight, looking at the game, you sort of saw that once white achieves this these pawns on a5 b4 a5 b4 c4, white just has a huge amount of possibilities to cause problems for the activity of black's pieces, to keep on tying them down, to combine multiple threads. So from that point of view, it's probably better to force the decision early, force a certain type of structure early, and not give white the opportunity to play around and the flexibility to determine exactly what white wants. And in actual fact, when you put Komodo defending these positions as black, it succeeds perfectly, and it does so in the following way. So, for example, now I'm not always strictly going to be following the exact course of the game, because these are from engine games that I run. But all that we're concentrating on is the basic way of defending. So this was a game between Stockfish and Komodo, I think, and knight e4, b3, and here Komodo was playing b5, just going for this structure, a5, bishop g4, and defending a6 with the pawn on b7. And, the point is, if you play c4 now, you're going to have a passed c pawn, not a passed a pawn. And it doesn't look trivial to me, but Komodo was defending this without breaking a sweat simply. So I mean that was quite decent. Just the idea of playing b5 as soon as possible. Stockfish did something completely different in actual fact. So following the game, let's just show you those moves again. Knight e2, knight e4, knight d4, bishop h3, bishop e5, g6, a4. In this position, Stockfish would have just played b6. And this really took me by surprise. I think I'd have to be thinking in a good deep way in order to work this one out, because it feels very odd to put the pawns on dark squares when white can attack that with a dark squared bishop. But basically, Stockfish was claiming that this pawn on b6 was defendable by the king, and then all you had to ensure really was to keep control of the d5 square, stop a knight coming in here to attack the pawn, and you'll be relatively safe. And with the pawns b6 on a5, stops white from really from advancing the pawns, because then exchanges happen. And of course, if white's pawns end up on light squares, you can keeps the white king honest, really, because if the king moves away, the bishop will attack the light squares on the queen side. And we can see how that looked. b3, king d7, bishop g4, knight c5, king b7, a5. So not even afraid of this exchange anymore now on c5, because we've got these targets on light squares. You know, white's never going to be able to move the king too far away, because these pawns will go. So knight a3, knight d3 check. Bishop d1, knight e4, bishop g4, knight d4, and you know, Stockfish is just having a whale of a time here, just not having any problems whatsoever. And the game continues and continues, but yeah, you know, no problem at all. Stockfish held this very easily. Now, of course, you know, if you're a human player, you'd probably get a little bit more nervous than that, but that seemed like you know, a pretty good and clear way of doing it. So just put the pawns on dark squares, hold that to 1 point, just make sure that the base of the pawns can't be attacked, and then just you know, keep you know, the queen side at bay. And in a way, it is quite funny, right? Because you know, in the middle game, Leela's standard reaction to the advance of a rook's pawn is to block it. You know, it never allows those rook's pawns to go too far forwards, unless it, you know, it just can't avoid it. And so strangely, in the ending, it just ended up allowing it, and this proved to be so costly. So, I mean, one thing that you might, if you've been really sharp, you might say, hey, wait a minute, Matthew, because you showed us this line before, a4, g5, knight d3, knight e4. And here Komodo played Stockfish played b3, we get b5. But couldn't you have just played a5 here? You know, just tie down the queen side. What are you doing then? Well, that's one of the interesting things then, because then Komodo demonstrates the value of having the king super active. I was very impressed by this. King d7, bishop d8, king c6. You notice that the knight on e4 there is stopping the white king from getting active. So black's king really manages to get active in the centre there. Bishop a7, g4, looking to liquidate the pawns. The bishop went to a7 to stop the king getting into d4. Knight f4, check, king c6, and now this incredible idea, g3 from Komodo. Knight takes, king d5, bishop b6, king e4. And I had to blink a little bit when I saw this. I thought, you know, why is this drawn? But the basic problem for white is that the only way that white's going to win is if its king manages to invade and start attacking this pawn, and then you can use this pawn as a decoy. But the black king is so active that this doesn't end up being possible, and this bishop can actually attack these pawns on b3 and c2 or b3 c4 from the rear, and we'll see how that looks. Bishop c7. I'll just whiz through these moves. They're not incredibly interesting, but eventually we'll get to some sort of point. You can just see Komodo not worrying at all. Bishop g4, bishop e2, lovely, no worries. Stockfish still not doing very much. Bishop e2, bishop d3, bishop f1, bishop e2, bishop g4, bishop e2, bishop d1. You know, again, the king just can't advance here because we're attacking this guy. And if you play b4, well, then you've blocked in your way of advancing. I mean, in the end, Stockfish does play b4, but then we get this, and this is a very important position to know, really. The key problem is for white is that this black king is active. I mean, if this white king was on b6, you'd be talking about a win for white. But with this black king here, it's just very, very difficult for white to achieve anything. And of course, you're talking about, if you go a6, you're talking about the wrong coloured rook's pawn for the bishop. So if you do go a6, I can just move my king to this corner and then give up my bishop for the g pawn, you know, and it's just a draw. So yeah, I mean, just really quite difficult. And this position is just a draw here. Nothing to be done about it. And well, the game continued just a little bit longer. Blah 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 blah. In the end, Stockfish went b6, bishop e2, and then it's just a draw. We put the bishop to a6, we put the king on a light square somewhere, and then we just wait forever. So yeah, I mean, you see a number of possibilities, and there was also something else as well that, you know, in this position b3, I think in a very similar position, Komodo played the move b6, just breaking up the pawns. I mean, this is again, this could have happened in the game as well, and that was also enough for a draw. It's not the ideal structure for black, but again, you're forcing white to have a passed c pawn rather than a passed a pawn, so it keeps everything, you know, within a much smaller area, and black doesn't get stretched half as much. So okay, but so, you know, what are we saying? Are we saying that this position after king d8 a5, that this was probably winning for white? Well, I'm not 100% sure, but it's maybe getting surprisingly close to it. Certainly, you know, black's going to have to start finding some very, very good moves. Now, what intrigued me actually was that yeah, bishop f1, b3. G5, king d1, king d7. You know, we got to this position, and well, I mean, you know, Stockfish is just winning loads and loads and loads of games here. But up till move 50, Stockfish was still managing to draw, and so I'm just going to take you up to move 50. Just see all this little episode of the bishop being chased away, king d1. You know, ready to play knight c2 to b4 and get rid of this bishop. And here Stockfish played this interesting idea. Actually, it's a gorgeous regrouping. It's king e7, knight e2, knight c5, knight c1, bishop e4, king e2, king f6, king e3, bishop g2, b4, and knight e6. This is the key point. Now, what is this knight doing on e6? This knight is defending the pawn on g5, so it doesn't need to advance. It's covering the d4 and c5 square, so the white king cannot get into the black position, and the bishop on g2, of course, is covering f3, e4, d5. So yeah, the white king can't get in there. So these two are combining beautifully like this. And then yeah, I mean, afterwards it's going to be a question of showing a little bit of care, because there are some quite scary moments. But if we just have a little look at this, knight g3 check, b5, takes, and now the key idea for black, because what white's threatening with the bishop over here is to play knight e4 and then a6, a7, a8. So black's got to be able to get the king across to the queen side, king d3, king d8, king e5, king d7, and the king will be able to defend against the a pawns. Now, there's some quite tricky stuff here, some stuff that you really need to understand properly. So here, for example, king c7 is the key defense. This discovered attack is, discovered check is not at all important. And there's another very important point to this. And the key point for keeping the pawn on g5 rather than g4 is that here, check, takes. Black is happy to give up the pawn on g5 as long as the exchange of knights takes place at the same time. And we've seen this position before. We've seen it with a pawn on g3 in one of Komodo's defenses. Even with the pawn on the h-file, this is still a draw. The king, the black king, is shouldering away the white king, stopping the king from activating itself. As soon as the pawn moves up here or anything like that, we just block with the bishop and then move the king over to the king's side, and it's a draw. And well, many moves played, but yeah, we just end up yeah, just with a total draw. So that was Stockfish's defence, bringing the knight round to e6 in this way. And that seems to be enough to draw. Only, this was with Stockfish black against Komodo as white. So I sort of thought, well, let's have a look at it, shall we? Let's give Stockfish white. Let's look at this move, knight c5. Give that to Komodo. Give Stockfish white, and then see what Stockfish does. And would you believe it? Stockfish won this position. And I'm not 100% sure whether it's like completely inevitable, but you're going to see at least what Stockfish does, what Stockfish achieves, and then you'll understand where the problem is. So King d2, Bishop f1, just get some shuffling moves. We've got our basic structure. The king is getting active. Stockfish is playing around with its pieces. King f2, knight g3 check, knight e4, starting to get serious, and now it gets really serious with knight d6. What is this setup doing? The knight d6, bishop b2. I mean, if you look at the video just a few minutes earlier, you'll see that Komodo had the bishop on g3 and the knight somewhere else. This knight bishop combination is again covering lots of squares here. Actually, it's putting a total barrier across the F file. What does that mean? It means that the king can't get back to the queen side. So when we start moving the pawns forwards, the king is going to be just a little bit slower getting back to the king side. Remember, we said the king had to go back to the king side in order to stop white's a pawn from queening. This is incredibly subtle, and it's just depending on single tempi, but I'm not quite sure why black's going king h5 and king g4. If you just waited with bishop g2, bishop h1, wouldn't you be a little bit quicker? But probably it doesn't make that much difference, because here we get a tempo with king f5, knight g3, king g6. But if you compare this to to the positions we were having in the other line, the Stockfish's king was already on d7, and here it's remote on g6. And well, after a, b, c takes b5, if you go king f7 now, I go knight e4, and you're way too slow. I'm just going to get in a6 and either queen my b pawn or queen my a pawn. You're not going to get out of there. And just a couple of lines to show. King e7, I go b6, I'm threatening a6. Bishop f1 to stop you from playing a6, and I just go bishop f6, bishop takes g5, not knight takes g5, of course we know that one's a draw, and then I'm just 2 pawns up. With the knight still on, I'll just go h4 and queen this pawn. I'll go knight f6 check and h5, and it's just going to be winning. If you go something like bishop f1, attack the pawn on b5, why not? King f2, bishop d3, king f3. Obviously b5 would allow knight d6 check. King e8, and I just go a6 takes and b6. Threatening b7, you go knight d8, I go knight c5, bishop b5, stopping this of course because I'd take, and bishop c6 check. But then I just go king g4. And I'm going to pick up this pawn, and this pawn will roll. And you've got an a pawn, but that's easily covered by this bishop, so it's of no consequence whatsoever. And this is the right coloured rook's pawn for the bishop, so you can swap all of these off for the b pawn. You'll still lose. So again, what was Stockfish's plan here? This idea of knight e6 is pretty good for black. I think it's a very good defense, but somehow this plan of putting the bishop on b2, knight on d6, possibly, with this sort of play, Stockfish can keep the black king at bay and gain enough tempi that this queenside counterplay, when it arrives, is just too dangerous. But it's amazingly subtle, this. It's and I'm not 100% convinced that if you anticipate this plan somehow, that you couldn't find some way to break it up. But just with some examination at the moment, I haven't found a way. Stockfish is always getting me. So there we are. Bit of a long video, I'm afraid, but I think I hope it's been worth it for you. I mean, I do think this is the most unbelievable technique I've ever seen. You know, to go from this to well, this, you know, just against a 3650 level engine. I mean, such a good endgame and positional player like Leela is incredible. But I think, you know, it's just in terms of understanding what happened, I think, you know, understanding the three battlefields on the position, the three areas of interest, and then seeing actually how step by step Stockfish increased its advantage in all of them. First of all, restricting the opponent's king with this maneuver, knight e2 to d4 and bishop e5. Then increasing its grip on the queen side with a5 and c4 b3, and then it had to do a little step back. You know, it had to let the black king escape in order to free its own king. You know, and that's a really complicated part, but it managed to do that with some great knight play. You know, just this idea, knight e2 to c1, temporarily retreating, but you know that you're not long-term passive. And then it got its king active, and then, you know, it had the advantage on that area of the board as well. And then then, you know, completing all that by putting the minor pieces on absolutely superb squares to restrict the king and also attack the queen side, 2 out of 3. And then afterwards, you know, from those great positions, rounding off the final gain on the board by forcing the g pawn to advance. And then with all of those three in its favor, then the Zugzwangs started coming in. And you know, this beautiful finish, and you know, this is you know, every engine was winning this at this stage, but the way that that Stockfish did it, you know, this beautiful maneuver, knight a4 to allow the king to move in, really, you know, it's real. It's what you associate with Leela, really. You know, this optimization of pieces, you know, this complete control of a color complex, and then just optimizing your pieces on successive outposts. That's what Stockfish did, and well, you know, it just led to an absolutely beautiful game. I have to say, I mean, I think I've learned just an unbelievable amount about endgame technique, you know, by looking at this game. And I think there's loads more to discover. I've spent a number of hours already analysing it, but I mean, I think there's much more to see. But you know, and I think that I thought I was very impressed as well by, first of all, by Stockfish's fantastic defense. You know, the idea of this defensive setup with a knight on e6 is really very impressive. But then on top of that, the way that it actually broke up that defensive structure by keeping the king at bay, and then, you know, just having the accuracy to whilst keeping the king at bay, to quickly come back to the you know, to the queen side and force through you know, the breaks and the entries. I mean, it was really really quite incredible. You know, so so there we are. You know, simply one of the most stunning bits of endgame technique I've ever seen. I can't really imagine that it could get much better than that. And you know, I guess that's why you know, Stockfish won the Chess 960. I think probably on balance, Leela's Chess 960 games were the most attractive. They looked the most like you know, really making the most of the Chess 960 possibilities. But yeah, in terms of actual chess, Leela is superb, but Stockfish is still in a class of its own. Alright then, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you enjoyed it, please give me a like or subscribe to the channel. Tell your friends, and maybe even take a look at my book, The Silicon Road to Chess Improvement, which you know, really deals with a lot of stuff like this. And otherwise, you know, thanks very much for watching, and hopefully see you at the next video.